All right, let's take a look back in history. On this day, back in 1992, the leaders of the U.S., Canada, and Mexico announced that they had completed a draft version of NAFTA, an economic agreement that would form the largest free trade zone in history, encompassing at least 370 million people and GDP of at least $6.5 trillion at the time. Now, for the U.S., the North American Free Trade Agreement meant about half of all of its exports to Mexico. That includes chips, computers, telecom equipment, medical devices, all duty-free immediately, and tariffs on almost all the other goods were phased out over the following 10 years. Now, while that deal had tangible benefits for the U.S. and Canada, Mexico was largely seen as the biggest beneficiary, particularly because of provisions that opened up Mexico's financial services industry. But NAFTA was and has remained controversial from the early seeds of a trilateral trade zone idea planted by Ronald Reagan to the implementation under President Bill Clinton to the renegotiation of the deal under President Trump. Many labor organizations opposed the agreement because of the fear that manufacturers would move to Mexico. In fact, in 1992, presidential candidate Ross Perot famously warned of that giant sucking sound of American jobs moving south. And in a rebuttal in 1993, Vice President Al Gore gave Perot a picture of the architects of the 1930 Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act and warned against following a similar path of U.S. protectionism. But the concerns raised by the unions, raised by Perot, raised by others were somewhat, founded. The U.S. had been running small but persistent trade surpluses when Mexico, for years, including a $1.7 billion surplus back in 1993. Now, how much did the U.S. trade deficit with Mexico widen in those first 2 years of NAFTA's existence? By the end of 1995, that surplus had flipped to a deficit of more than $15 billion. And as of last year, that trade gap had widened to $152 billion, second only to our deficit with China. Now, economists still argue over the impact of that, with studies showing it didn't actually cause major aggregate job losses. But you know what? It also didn't significantly boost GDP. And after years of hand-wringing, a massive renegotiated deal took effect back in July 2020. And even today, back in here in 2024, NAFTA still remains a hot-button political issue.